I have a pair of mittens. I'm holding them now. They are red, or they were red once. The color has gone out of them the way color goes out of everything eventually, faded to something closer to rust or dried blood or whatever you call the color that red becomes when 78 years have passed over it. They are small, a child's mittens. They would not fit my hands now, and they would not have fit my hands for a very long time. The wool is thin in places, worn through at the thumb of the left one where I must have gripped things, though I cannot remember what an 11-year-old girl grips with such persistence that she wears through wool. They are useless. They have been useless for most of a century, and I cannot throw them away. My mother made them. She made them in the autumn of 1849 and left them on the kitchen table one morning without comment. I came downstairs and they were there, sitting beside my breakfast plate, and my mother was at the stove with her back to me, and she did not turn around, and she did not say, "Here are your new mittens," or "I made these for you," or "Your old ones are worn out, and you'll need these when the weather turns." She said nothing. The mittens were there. That was sufficient. That was how my mother conducted every act of care she ever performed in her life. Silently, without announcement, without requiring or apparently even desiring acknowledgment. I picked them up and put them on. They fit perfectly. She had measured my hands somehow without my knowing, which I have thought about over the years, because I cannot determine when she would have done this. While I slept, perhaps. Or perhaps she simply knew the size of my hands the way she knew everything about the practical dimensions of her household, by observation so constant and so quiet that the observed never noticed being observed. I am 89 years old. I have outlived almost everyone I have ever known. My husband Theodore is 20 years dead. My mother has been dead since 1889, which is 38 years ago. I have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who visit me in this house in Great Barrington, where I have lived since 1859. And I am holding a pair of mittens that a woman who never once told me she loved me made with her own hands from wool. She carded and spun herself on a wheel that her mother had used before her and her mother's mother before that. I never told my mother I loved her. She never told me. Those words were not spoken in our house. They were not spoken in any house I knew of growing up. I have thought about this for a very long time, decades, and I am not certain anymore whether the absence of those words was a failure or simply a fact about the world I was born into, like the absence of electricity or the absence of paved roads. It was not there. We did not miss it because we did not know it was something that could be there, or perhaps we did miss it, my mother and I, in some way we could not identify because we had no name for what was missing. I should tell you who I am and where I come from, though I find at 89 that the particulars of biography interest me less than they once did. My name is Constance Ruth Halloway. I was born Constance Ruth Farnsworth on the 15th of October, 1838 in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, in a farmhouse 3 miles east of Great Barrington, on a road that followed the Housatonic River south. My father was Abel Farnsworth. He farmed 90 acres, raised dairy cattle, grew corn and hay, and kept an orchard of apple trees that produced cider we sold at market in Great Barrington every autumn. It was a pretty place to grow up if you were inclined to notice prettiness, which nobody in my family was particularly. The Berkshire Hills are gentle compared to northern New England, rolling rather than steep green most of the year. And in autumn they turn colors that I have since been told attract people from the cities who come to look at them, which is something I would not have believed possible when I was a child, people traveling to look at trees. But I understand it now in a way I did not then. My mother was Prudence Farnsworth, born Prudence Aldrich. She was small, I remember that, smaller than me by the time I was 12, which embarrassed me at the time because I thought mothers should be larger than their children, and mine was not. She had narrow hands and narrow feet, and a face that was not pretty and not plain, but something else, something I have never found the right word for. Arranged, perhaps, everything in its proper place. Her features were orderly, the way her kitchen was orderly, the way her garden was orderly, the way everything she touched became orderly, because she could not abide disorder in any form. She worked. That is the first thing I would say about her if someone asked, and nobody has asked, which is part of why I am telling this now, because I am 89, and she has been dead nearly 4 decades, and I have never properly described her to anyone. She worked from the time she rose, which was before dawn every day of her life that I witnessed, until the time she went to bed, which was after the rest of the household had retired. I do not remember ever seeing my mother sit during daylight hours except in church on Sundays. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended, she knitted, she spun, she carded wool, she churned butter, she preserved food, she tended the garden, she managed the chickens, she assisted with milking when my father needed assistance, she washed clothes in water, she heated herself over a fire. She built herself with wood she had in some cases split herself when my father was occupied elsewhere. She did all of this without complaint and also without satisfaction as far as I could observe. It was simply what was done. You did not complain about it for the same reason you did not complain about breathing. It was the condition of being alive. I want to try to explain something about my mother and about the family she came from and the world that produced her, because without this explanation, what I am about to describe will sound like coldness, and it was not coldness. It was something else entirely, and I have spent most of my life trying to determine what. The Farnsworths and the Aldriches were old Massachusetts families, not prominent, not wealthy, but old in the sense that they had been in Berkshire County since before the Revolution, farming the same land, attending the same congregational church, marrying into the same neighboring families, maintaining the same customs and temperament across generations, with a consistency that I now recognize as remarkable, and that I then simply accepted as the way things were. And the way things were in those families was silent. Not silent in the sense of hostility or punishment, silent in the sense that emotions were private matters, interior events that occurred within a person and remained within that person and were not distributed to others through language. You did not say, "I am sad." You did not say, "I am happy." You certainly did not say, "I love you." These statements would have been considered, and I am searching for the right word, unreliable. That is close. Words about feelings were suspect because feelings changed and words once spoken could not be retrieved, and the gap between what a feeling actually was and what words could convey about it was considered too wide to be bridged honestly. Better to say nothing. Better to let actions speak because actions could not lie the way words could. My grandfather Aldrich was married to my grandmother for 52 years. He never told her he loved her. I know this because my mother mentioned it once, the only time she ever spoke about such things, and she mentioned it not as a criticism, but as a fact, in the same tone she might have used to say that her father grew barley, or that the barn roof leaked in heavy rain. He did not say it. This was observed without judgment, because in my mother's understanding there was nothing to judge. He had demonstrated it. He had worked beside that woman for 52 years, provided for her, stayed when he might have left, walked 8 miles through a blizzard in February of 1831 to fetch a physician when she was ill with pneumonia. He had nearly frozen to death on that walk, lost 2 toes to frostbite. The physician saved my grandmother's life, but my grandfather walked with a limp for the rest of his. That, in my mother's view, was love. The walk was love. The frozen toes were love. The words would have been redundant and potentially misleading because words were easy, and the walk had not been easy, and the value of a thing was determined by its cost rather than by its description. I absorbed this. Children absorb. They do not choose what to absorb any more than a sponge chooses what liquid to take in. I absorbed my mother's silence and my father's silence and the silence of the Farnsworth household and the silence of the Aldrich heritage, and by the time I was old enough to recognize that other households might operate differently, the absorption was complete. I was constituted, built, finished, a woman who could feel things with great depth and express almost none of them through language. But I am ahead of myself. I want to go back to specific things, specific moments, because the moments are what I have left, and they are more truthful than any generalization I might offer about what my mother was or was not. I was 7 years old and sick with fever. I do not remember what caused the fever, some childhood illness, measles perhaps, or simply the unnamed fevers that children of that era contracted and either survived or did not. I remember being hot and cold at the same time, which is how fevers work, though it seems impossible when you are 7 and do not understand what your body is doing. I remember the blankets feeling wrong, too heavy and not heavy enough simultaneously. I remember waking in the night, the room dark, the house silent, and seeing my mother sitting in the chair beside my bed. She was not touching me. She was not speaking to me. She was not reading or sewing or doing any of the things she normally did when her hands were unoccupied, which was never, her hands were never unoccupied during waking hours. She was simply sitting in the dark beside my bed, watching me. I said, "Mama?" And she said, "Go back to sleep, Constance." And I did. And when I woke again, it was morning, and she was still there in the same chair in the same position, which meant she had sat there all night, 7 or 8 hours, doing nothing, watching me breathe. And when I woke, she stood up and said, "Your fever has broken," and went downstairs and started breakfast and did not mention it again. She had sat beside me all night. I did not understand at 7 what that meant. I am 89, and I am only now beginning to understand what that meant. She sat. That was her "I love you." 8 hours in a hard chair in the dark watching a child breathe. She could not say the words, but she could sit in that chair, and she did, and it cost her a night's sleep, which for a woman who worked as hard as my mother worked was no small cost. But I did not know this then. I knew only that she had not held my hand, had not stroked my hair, had not said, "You will be all right, darling. Mama is here." The things that I have since learned other mothers say. She said, "Go back to sleep." That was what she had. I was 14, and I wanted to attend the Female Academy in Great Barrington, Miss Thayer's Academy. It was a modest institution by the standards of the larger cities, but for Berkshire County it represented genuine education: literature, mathematics, natural philosophy, French, music. I wanted it desperately, though I would not have used that word then because desperation was another feeling that Farnsworth did not express. I mentioned it to my mother once at supper in the careful, indirect manner I had learned was the only way to approach subjects that mattered. I said that Sarah Whitcomb was attending Miss Thayer's in the autumn, and that the fee was $8 per term, which was considerable, but not impossible. My mother said nothing. My father said nothing. The subject was not raised again. I assumed the answer was no, delivered in the Farnsworth manner, which was silence. Silence meant no, or silence meant the matter was under consideration, or silence meant I heard you, but I am not prepared to respond. Silence could mean many things in our household, and you learned to interpret it the way a sailor interprets weather, by accumulated experience and frequent error. 3 weeks later, I came downstairs on a September morning, and found on the kitchen table, beside my breakfast plate, in exactly the spot where the mittens had appeared 5 years earlier, a receipt from Miss Thayer's academy showing payment of $8 for the autumn term and a new dress made from blue cotton that my mother had apparently sewn without my knowledge, working on it during whatever hours she carved from her already impossible schedule, probably after I was asleep, by candlelight, her small hands pushing the needle through the fabric, stitching a dress I had not asked for, but that she understood I would need, because you could not attend an academy in your farm clothes, and she would not send me looking less than properly turned out. There was no note. She was at the stove with her back to me. I stood there holding the receipt and looking at the dress, and I wanted to say something. I wanted to cross the kitchen and put my arms around her and say, "Thank you, Mama," or "I love you, Mama," or anything at all that would acknowledge what she had done, the money she had found somehow from a household that had very little to spare, the dress she had made in secret, the education she was giving me that she herself had never received. I wanted to say something. I opened my mouth, and what came out was, "The dress is good quality," she said, without turning. "It should last the year if you're careful with it." And that was all. That was our conversation about the most significant gift she ever gave me. The dress is good quality. It should last the year. 2 sentences. I went to Miss Thayer's. I received an education that altered the entire trajectory of my life. And the woman who made it possible, and I never discussed it beyond those 2 sentences. I married Theodore Halloway in June of 1859. Theodore was not from a Berkshire family. He was from Hartford, Connecticut. He had come to Great Barrington to work in the paper mill that had been established on the Housatonic River in the early 1850s. He was a kind man, an openly kind man, which was disorienting to me because I was not accustomed to openness. Theodore said what he felt. He said good morning as though he meant it. He said, "You look well today," and you could see in his face that he was looking and that he did think you looked well and that he wanted you to know this. He was, by Farnsworth standards, almost alarmingly expressive. He told me he loved me on our 4th meeting, which was at a church social in Great Barrington in April of 1858. I was 19, he was 23. He said it simply, without preamble, standing beside the refreshment table while someone played a fiddle badly in the next room. "I love you, Constance. I have loved you since the first time I saw you, and I expect I will love you until I die, and I wanted you to know." I did not know what to do with this information. No one had ever said those words to me. I stood there holding a cup of cider, and I felt something enormous move inside me, something warm and terrifying, and what I said was, "The cider is quite good this year." Theodore laughed. He laughed, and he was not offended, and he did not withdraw his declaration, and he did not seem to require any particular response. He simply laughed and said, "Yes, the cider is quite good," and then he asked me to dance, and I said I was not much of a dancer, and he said neither was he, and we danced anyway, badly. And I loved him by the end of that dance, though I did not tell him so, because I did not know how and would not learn how for a very long time, and even then I learned it imperfectly. We married in June. My mother helped me dress on the morning of the wedding. She came to my room early before anyone else was awake, and she brought the dress she had made for the occasion, white cotton with small blue flowers embroidered along the collar and cuffs, work so fine you had to look closely to see it was hand-done rather than machine-made, and each flower must have taken her an hour at least, and there were dozens of them. She helped me into the dress. She adjusted every fold, every pin, every button. She fussed with the hem, which was already perfect, but which she adjusted anyway because adjusting was what her hands knew how to do when her mouth did not know what to say. I stood before the mirror and she stood behind me, and I could see her face reflected over my shoulder, and there was something in that face that I had never seen before. a fullness, an expression that was not composed or orderly, but was something raw and unmanaged, something that had broken through the surface of her habitual control, and I realized that she was feeling something so large that her machinery for containing feelings was for once insufficient. I turned to face her. I thought, this is the moment. She will say it now. She will say, I love you, Constance. Or she will say, you are beautiful. Or she will say, I am proud of you. Or she will say, I will miss you, something, anything. Some word that acknowledges what is passing between us, that her eldest daughter is leaving her house, that after today things will be different, that 21 years of sitting in dark rooms beside sick beds and sewing dresses in secret and leaving mittens on kitchen tables have led to this moment. And this moment matters, and she feels it, and she wants me to know. She straightened my collar. She tugged it slightly to the left. She stepped back and examined me with the same practical eye she used when examining a finished loaf of bread or a properly hung gate. And she said, that's right then. That's right then, 3 words. Not I love you, not you are beautiful, not I am proud. That's right then. As though I were a task completed, a job done correctly, a thing that met specifications. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her shoulders and shake her and say, Mother, say something real. Say what you are feeling. I can see it in your face. I know it is there. Just say it, just once, please. But I did not scream, and I did not grab her, because I was a Farnsworth, and Farnsworths did not do such things, and so I said, thank you, Mother. And she nodded and went downstairs to see about the preparations, and that was the last conversation we had before I became someone else's household. Theodore and I settled in Great Barrington. He continued at the paper mill and eventually became foreman, a position of moderate responsibility and adequate income. We were comfortable in the way my parents had been comfortable, not wealthy, not poor, occupying that middle ground where you did not worry about food, but you thought carefully before spending money on anything that was not strictly necessary. Our first child, Arthur, was born in March of 1861, 2 weeks before the war began at Fort Sumter. Theodore enlisted in the fall of that year, joining a Massachusetts regiment. He was gone for 3 years. I managed alone, as women did, with Arthur and then with our second child, Helen, born in 1862, while Theodore was somewhere in Virginia. My mother came when Helen was born. She came without being asked because she had known when the child was due, and she appeared at my door on the morning of the first labor pains with a bag packed and her apron already on, as though she had been waiting for the signal. She stayed for 3 weeks. She managed everything. Cooked, cleaned, cared for Arthur, tended Helen when I was too exhausted or too sore to manage. She was 54 years old, and she worked with the same relentless efficiency she had always possessed, diminished slightly by age, but not significantly. On the day she left, I walked her to the road where my brother Martin was waiting with the wagon. I wanted to thank her. I had been composing the words for 3 weeks, rehearsing them in my head, trying to assemble a sentence that would convey what her presence had meant to me, alone, with a new baby and a husband at war, and the fear that attends all of those circumstances simultaneously. I said, Mother, I want to thank you for everything you have done. She picked up her bag and said, no need. It's what's done. She climbed onto the wagon. Martin clicked at the horse. They pulled away. She did not look back. She did not wave. It's what's done. 4 words. The Farnsworth translation of I love you. I would do anything for you. I am your mother, and this is what mothers do. Compressed into 4 words and delivered without emphasis. And I stood in the road watching the wagon disappear, and I felt that enormous thing move inside me again, that warm, terrible thing, and I said nothing to it because I did not have the words. Theodore came home from the war in 1864, thinner, quieter, but intact. We had 2 more children, Rosalind in 1866 and Frederick in 1869. Theodore continued to tell me he loved me. He said it in the mornings, he said it in the evenings, he said it when he left for the mill and when he returned. I love you, Constance. Each time he said it, I felt the truth of it arrive inside me, and I felt my own love rise in response, and I felt the words form somewhere in my chest and begin their journey toward my mouth and then stop. Every time they stopped, caught on something. Some obstruction built into me by 21 years in the Farnsworth house, by a mother who sat all night in dark rooms and sewed dresses in secret and left mittens on tables, and never once said the thing that all of this labor was trying to say. Theodore would say, "I love you," and I would say yes, or "I know," or "thank you," and I could see in his face the small deflation, the tiny retreat of hope that this time she might say it back. He never complained. Not once in 48 years of marriage did he reproach me for my inability to return his words. He simply kept saying them, kept offering them, like a man who places a gift on a table every morning, knowing it will not be opened, but placing it there anyway, because the placing is what he can do. I failed him in this, I know that. He deserved to hear those words from me, and I could not produce them. The machinery was not there. My mother had not installed it because her mother had not installed it in her because her mother had not installed it in her. And somewhere back along that line of silent, capable women, the part that says "I love you" aloud had been removed or had never been included in the original construction, and by the time it reached me, the absence was so thorough that I could not overcome it through will alone. My mother died in November of 1889. She was 77 years old. She died in her sleep in the farmhouse where she had lived her entire married life, the same farmhouse where I had grown up, the same kitchen where the mittens had appeared on the table 40 years before. My father had died 3 years earlier. My brother Martin had taken over the farm. He sent word and I came immediately. The funeral was small. Congregational church in Great Barrington. The minister said the things ministers say about virtuous women, Proverbs 31, as was customary. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. My mother would have approved of that passage, though she would not have said so. She would have sat through her own eulogy with the same composed, orderly expression she had maintained through everything else, and she would have found the entire proceeding slightly excessive. After the funeral, I went to the farmhouse to help Martin's wife sort through my mother's belongings. This was expected, the practical work of death, the dismantling of a life into objects that must be distributed or discarded. My mother's possessions were few. She had never accumulated anything beyond what was necessary. Her clothes were plain and worn and clean. Her kitchen implements were serviceable and familiar to me. The same pots and pans and wooden spoons I remembered from childhood. Her sewing basket with its needles and thread and the small pair of scissors she had used for as long as I could remember. Martin's wife suggested I go through the bedroom, which had been my parents' room and which, since my father's death, had been my mother's alone. I went upstairs. The room was as I remembered it, plain clean, a bed, a dresser, a chair, a small table with a lamp. The bed was made with the precision my mother brought to everything, the covers pulled tight, the pillows aligned. It looked as though no one had ever slept in it, though someone had slept in it for more than 50 years. I opened the top drawer of the dresser, expecting to find handkerchiefs or stockings or the ordinary small items that accumulate in a woman's dresser. What I found instead stopped me entirely. I stood there with the drawer open, and I could not move for what must have been several minutes. The drawer contained letters, my letters, every letter I had written to my mother since I left home in 1859. 30 years of letters, bundled by year with string, each bundle neat and ordered, the earliest at the bottom, the most recent on top. I had not written frequently, perhaps 8 or 10 letters a year, the dutiful correspondence of a daughter who lived 3 miles away and visited regularly, and had little need to write but did so anyway because it was what was done. Mundane letters. Arthur took his first steps. Helen has a cold. Theodore was promoted at the mill. The apple tree in the yard produced well this year. Ordinary information. I had not imagined she kept them. Had not imagined they mattered enough to keep. Beneath the letters I found other things. A small envelope containing a lock of hair, fine and light brown. My hair. Baby hair, cut from my head at some age I cannot determine. Saved in an envelope on which my mother had written in her small, precise hand, Constance, 1839. She had kept a lock of my baby hair for 50 years. Beneath that, a pressed flower. I recognized it after a moment. From my wedding bouquet, wild asters I had picked from the roadside that morning, because we could not afford cultivated flowers. My mother had taken one and pressed it and kept it in a drawer for 30 years. Beneath the flower I found drawings, small, clumsy drawings made by children, signed in the unsteady hand of my son Arthur and my daughter Helen. Pictures they had made for Grandmother Prudence during visits. A house with smoke coming from the chimney. A cat that looked more like a potato with ears. A tree with apples that were larger than the trunk. My mother had kept everyone. I sat down on the floor of that room. I sat on the floor beside the open drawer, and I held the letters and the lock of hair and the pressed flower and the children's drawings, and I understood something that I should have understood decades earlier, but did not because I had been looking for love in a form my mother did not possess. She had loved me. She had loved me enormously. The evidence was in my hands. 30 years of letters saved and bundled with string, a lock of baby hair in an envelope labeled in her writing, a flower from my wedding, her grandchildren's drawings. She had kept everything, not displayed it, not shown it to anyone, not said, "Look what my daughter wrote," or "Look what my grandchildren drew." She had kept it silently, privately, in a closed drawer in a bedroom no one entered but her, a secret archive of love that she could not speak and could not show, but could not bring herself to discard. I sat on that floor and I cried. I cried for the first time in longer than I could remember, because Farnsworth did not cry, but I was not a Farnsworth anymore. I was a Halloway, and Theodore had spent 30 years trying to teach me that feelings could be expressed, and perhaps something of his teaching had finally reached whatever part of me my mother's teaching had sealed shut. I cried for my mother who had loved me and could not say it. I cried for myself who had loved her and could not say it. I cried for the drawer full of letters and the lock of hair and the pressed flower and the decades of silence between two people who felt everything and said nothing. I went home that evening. Theodore was in the parlor reading. I came through the door and he looked up and saw my face and started to rise, and I said, "I love you, Theodore." He went still, completely still, like a man who has heard a sound he has been listening for so long that he had stopped believing he would hear it. He looked at me and his eyes filled, and he said, "I know you do, Constance." I said it. After 30 years of marriage, after 30 years of yes and I know and thank you. I said it because my mother's drawer had broken something open in me, had cracked the Farnsworth seal, and the words came through the crack before I could stop them. I love you. 3 words. The same 3 words my mother never spoke. I said them and I meant them, and they were inadequate, as words always are, as my mother always understood they were, but they were what I had. Theodore died in 1907. I said it to him many times in the years after my mother's death. Never easily, never naturally. Each time it felt like pushing something heavy through a narrow opening. But I said it, and each time his face changed in the same way, that quiet illumination, that look of a man receiving something he had waited for and was grateful for and would never take for granted. He died knowing I loved him. My mother did not die knowing I loved her, and that is the difference that I carry. I am 89. I live alone in the house Theodore and I shared for 48 years. My children visit. Arthur lives nearby and comes most days. Helen writes from Boston. Rosalind is in Springfield. Frederick is in New York. They are good people. They had a mother who struggled to express love and a father who expressed it freely, and I think they received enough between the two of us to build their own lives on. I hope they did. I believe they did. I hold these mittens, red mittens, faded, made by a woman who has been dead for 38 years, who sat beside my bed in the dark when I was sick, who paid my school fees and made my dresses without ever being asked, who straightened my collar on my wedding day and said, "That's right then," who came when my babies were born and left, saying, "It's what's done," who kept my letters in a drawer for 30 years and a lock of my baby hair in an envelope and a flower from my wedding and never told anyone, never showed anyone, never said, "Look how much I love my daughter," because she could not say it. The words were not in her. They had been bred out or trained out or simply never planted in whatever soil produces such words, and their absence was not her fault any more than the absence of rain is the fault of the sky. She loved me in mittens, in dresses sewn by candlelight, in nights spent sitting in hard chairs watching a child breathe, in receipts left on kitchen tables, in the pressed flower and the lock of hair and the bundled letters in the closed drawer. She loved me in every stitch and every silence and every act of labor performed without acknowledgment or expectation of gratitude. She spoke love every day of my life in a language I did not learn to translate until I found that drawer, and by then she was in the ground, and I could not go to her and say, "I heard you, Mama. I finally heard you." These mittens, red wool, faded, 78 years old. Each stitch placed by her hands in the autumn of 1849 by lamplight after the rest of the house was asleep, because that was the only time she had for such things, and she used it to make mittens for a daughter she could not tell she loved. Every stitch a word she could not say. I have counted the stitches. There are hundreds. Hundreds of words she could not speak, worked into wool with needles, left on a kitchen table without comment for an 11-year-old girl who did not understand what she was receiving. I understand now, too late, as understanding usually comes, but I understand. I will be buried with these mittens. I have told Arthur. He looked at me strangely, but agreed. I want them with me, not because I'm sentimental. I am a Farnsworth. We are not sentimental. But because these mittens are the closest I will ever come to hearing my mother say, "I love you," and wherever I am going, I would like to bring that with me.